It's early morning at Castle and the kitchen is all...
Hello, and welcome to the 17th Annual Food Justice Summit. My name is Enrique Orozco, and I am one of the co-organizers of the summit this year. Before we start your session, I want to highlight some of the accessibility options, engagement features, and explain how to access interpretation services. Hola, y bienvenido a la 17ª Cumbre Anual de la Justicia Alimentaria de Chicago. Me llamo Enrique Orozco y soy uno de los coordinadores de la cumbre este año. Antes de empezar, quiero tomar un momento para indicar las opciones de accesibilidad, las herramientas de participación y los servicios de interpretación. Para acceder a los servicios de interpretación, fíjese al lado izquierdo de su pantalla. Al hacer clic al botón que dice Audio Captions, se abrirá una ventana. Haga clic en Select y luego elige el lenguaje de su preferencia, inglés o español. Comenzarás automáticamente a escuchar al intérprete. Para acceder a los servicios de subtítulo, elige el botón que indique CC. Se tiene que elegir una de estas opciones. Para escuchar a los presentadores, elige la opción Floor. Se puede cerrar esta ventana. Finalmente, deberás silenciar el video principal para no escuchar a los presentadores e intérpretes. Estas opciones también se pueden encontrar al lado derecho de su pantalla, bajo la pestaña que dice Interpretación. To access interpretation services, look at the left side of your screen. By clicking on the Audio Captions button, you will open a window. Click on Select and then choose which language you would like to hear, English or Spanish. You will automatically begin to hear the interpreter. To turn on closed captioning, click on the CC button. You will need to select one of these options. To hear the original speakers, select the floor option. You may close this window. Finally, you will need to mute the main video in order to not hear the original speakers and interpreters. These features can also be found on the right side of your screen under the Interpretation tab. The platform also offers a number of visual accessibility tools. To find them, click on the profile image at the bottom of your screen, and then select Accessibility Adjustments. You can also change the language of the window through this pop-up. Under these accessibility adjustments, you can select different options to make the website easier to read. We welcome you to participate in the conversation through the chat window. Clicking again on the Chat tab on the right side will open up this screen. Select the box at the beginning to begin typing into the chat. At the end of the session, we will open for a brief question and answer portion, and you may type your questions here. Afterwards, I invite you to open the polling tab to answer a very short survey that lets our team know how well we did in planning these sessions. I hope you enjoy the 17th Annual Chicago Food Justice Summit. I will now turn it over to your speakers.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ruby Ferguson, and I'm the Food Equity Policy Lead with the Greater Chicago Food Depository in the Mayor's Office, and I'm here with two of our co-chairs for Chicago's Food Equity Council. And I'll kick it to Erica to introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Erica Allen. I'm, as Ruby just shared, I'm one of the co-chairs for the Food Equity Council for the City of Chicago and all of our communities. And I'm also the co-founder, co-CEO of Strategic Development and Programs for Urban Growers Collective. And I'll kick it over to Juan Sebastian.
Thanks, Erica and Ruby, and good morning. Yeah, still morning, everybody. My name is Juan Sebastian Arias. I work here in the mayor's office on the policy team as a deputy director on a number of different housing, community development related issues, including food security stuff, which we'll be talking about in a bit. But I'm excited for the chance to be here with you all today and to share some of the work that we've been doing.
Great. And we're super excited to tell you more about Chicago's Food Equity Council. And we'll start with a more formal presentation to just give some context of how we got here and what we're looking forward to in 2022. And then we'll open it up and I'll ask some questions to our co-chairs so they can give you some more of their brilliance on this work. And then we'll open it up to questions for you. So I think we all know, especially as participants in this conference, that structural inequity in food access has been happening for a long time. And we typically see it in neighborhoods of color that are low income, where there's less access to healthy foods and resources. And this has persisted for a long time. It's multifactorial. And you cannot kind of separate food insecurity and food access from poverty and racism. And so I think these maps are always really vivid to see because the geography really tells the picture. And so we see these four maps rather, that start with residents who have low food access, percent of adults with easy access to fruits and vegetables, percent of residents living below the federal poverty line, and unemployment rate. And this really shows a snapshot of food insecurity across Chicago and how your zip code can often indicate what food access and what food security looks like for you. And so in 2020, there were a lot of lessons learned with the pandemic, an economic downturn, and a civic uprising. There's a lack of centralized coordination across Chicago's food system. And so I feel like a lot of us have experienced this, where food is everything. Food is zoning, food is nutrition, food is medicine, food is all of these different things. And so they show up in all different places across the city. Another kind of key lesson that I think a lot of us knew, but became really apparent in 2020, was that there's long-standing racial inequities in Chicago's food system, and they prevent communities from being resilient. And then a third thing is that there was a lot of momentum and a lot of interest in food access, because things that a lot of advocates have been talking about for a long time around food security really became very visible and hard to ignore in 2020. And so food leaders from across the city took this opportunity to really leverage what is not great for the city of Chicago to come up with a solution. And so I think kind of pointing to the key challenge is that food touches everywhere in Chicago's food system, but there's not one place that's bringing all of this work together and having a key vision on how we move forward to make improvements. So, as I mentioned, in 2020, food leaders from across the city got together and looked at existing plans. And I always like flagging that the idea was not to make a new plan, but rather there have been so many plans that have been released about food access in the city of Chicago. And so let's take those plans and figure out how we can actually move forward with transparency and accountability with those plans. And so leaders from city departments, sister agencies, and community-based organizations all got together and looked at those plans and did deep dives across priorities and pillars of the food system to identify what are the next steps we need to take to really leverage this work. And so the key kind of guiding plan was Healthy Chicago 2025, which realized that we have an important goal of furthering the health and vibrancy of neighborhoods most affected by inequities. And I want to pause for a moment and really lean into the word vibrancy, because I think a lot of times when we have discussions around food access, it can sometimes be reduced to just calories in or making sure that people have a meal on the table. But I always like to remind everybody of all the things that food means to them. And it should be able to mean that for every Chicago in the city. So it is culture, it is community, it is celebration. It is when I'm sad and I want a pint of ice cream, or when I'm happy and I want to give someone a cupcake. It's all of those things, and everybody should have access to that. And so the strategy that was highlighted in Healthy Chicago 2025 was having an equity-oriented food planning to bring coordination to key areas of the food system. And so here we are in September 2020 to December 2020. There was this sprint group that was put together, and like I mentioned, looked at existing plans to kind of figure out what can we do to really dive deep? In June 2021, the Food Equity Agenda was published, which identified 5 priorities across the food system, and I'll get more into that soon. And then in August, I was hired to help staff this work and kind of support this group in reimagining how we can leverage this work moving forward. And then February, super exciting, and you may have seen this, an executive order was signed formalizing the Food Equity Council. So, what is the Food Equity Council? I think we've alluded to this, but it's really helpful to anchor ourselves in this, that the current structure of Chicago's food system is that different departments and different community-based organizations are working on food access and food sovereignty in all these different ways, and food justice. But there's not a coordinated, unified vision across all of those different spaces. And so where we're shifting towards now is starting coordination. And what we're looking forward to in the future is where community and numerous city departments are all working together to get towards this vibrant, resilient, and just food system in Chicago. So the purpose of the Food Equity Council is really simply, and not simply because it's challenging, but has a straightforward goal of building a more just and equitable and resilient food system that advances food security and eliminates disparities in health and wealth. And the role that this body will play is convene, implement, and enable. And so super honored to be working with all of these incredible council members, but the Food Equity Council is made up of city departments, sister agencies, and community-based organizations, and really is community focused, where we can get community feedback on all of the priorities that we're thinking about advancing. And so I really like to point to this symbiotic relationship of the Food Equity Council and its work groups, where the Food Equity Council is keeping that strategic bird's eye view on what is the mission, where are we trying to go, what does a just and resilient and vibrant food system look like? And then the Food Equity Council work groups are really working to push that work forward and taking all of the brilliant minds and all of the work that is already happening, but bringing it together at the table to advance that work. So now I'm going to hop into the priorities and work groups, which is super exciting. They just started meeting in February and January of this year. So as I mentioned, in June of 2021, the Food Equity Agenda was published, and there were 3 main goals. So one is formally establishing a Food Equity Council. And so woohoo, we did that with the executive order signed in February. 2 is advancing a policy and programmatic agenda with 5 priorities across the food system. And I'll get into what those are in a second. And 3 is expand Chicago's food system coalition, which we know is going to take time, but we're starting to do that work as we leverage these work groups and start to advance the work. And so I always like kind of starting with anchoring that there are multiple pillars across the food system. And so we had to look at all of those different pillars and all of these different spaces, and then come up with priorities on how we push them forward. And so there are a total of 4 work groups that are helping advance these 5 priorities that span everywhere from our emergency food system to how institutions are procuring to how we can support BIPOC food businesses and entrepreneurs. And so I think it's always helpful to talk about the process of how we got to these objectives. And so kind of going back to the things that I've alluded to before, in 2020, there was a pull apart of existing plans. And so in identifying those priorities, there are also kind of what are actions that we can take to get there, and what is feasible for us to do in the near term, and what is something that I call a parking lot that we can kind of reach to later and grab as we start to check things off on our list. In June 2021, that's where all of that information was synthesized, and the 5 near-term priorities were identified of this is where we need to start as a council. Then in August, when I started, I had the honor of doing deep dives with experts in each priority and really understand what levers we can pull and what is, I think, both actionable and bold list of objectives that we can look towards in 2022. And then in December, after all of those deep dives, I presented those objectives to the council and got any feedback to get where we are now, where the 4 work groups are activating that work. And I think it's always important to note that this is what the first set of objectives, this was the process for the first set of objectives. And as we continue to evolve as a food equity council and work groups, that process might start to look a little bit different. And so now I'm going to walk through each of the work groups and the objectives in that space. So our first work group is dedicated to the emergency food and nutrition program space. And that's our first 2 priorities, which is thinking about eliminating barriers to expanding food pantries in the city of Chicago. And then the other priority, which is thinking about marketing and maximizing our federal nutrition programs. And my goodness, that second one is a huge and really exciting but challenging thing to think about. And so one of the things that I want to highlight as an objective that we're looking at this year is how can we leverage city communication channels to inform Chicagoans about emergency food access, about nutrition programs, who's eligible, how do you enroll, where do you enroll, how are they accepted, right? That's really challenging. And so I flagged this one, maybe partially because I come from WIC and knew how challenging it was when I would have a participant come in my clinic and they had everything going on and I wanted to support them and there wasn't one place that I could do it. And so how can we start to think as a city of creating one place to do that? And I think this is a great objective that highlights the goal of the Food Equity Council of bringing everybody together to the table to make food access more accessible. Another thing that I think is really exciting to highlight is encouraging retailers to offer SNAP online, because as we think about different access in different communities, SNAP Online is a great way to bring food to communities and use your SNAP dollars to do that. Our second work group is focused on institutional procurement. And so the priority for this work group is to leverage institutional procurement to support BIPOC growers and producers and other components of the food system. And so a lot of this is leveraging the incredible work that CIFPAC and CDPH has been involved with the Good Food Purchasing Program. And how do we bring this to the Food Equity Council Forum to say, we're supporting you in this work, we'll bring partners to the table, and let's celebrate wins or highlight opportunities through the Food Equity Council. So one exciting thing, an objective that's happening in this space is further implementing GFPP and a city department sister agency and private institution, and giving an opportunity for all of them to learn from each other in this work group. I think another thing that is exciting to explore and highlight here is exploring models of aggregation for BIPOC growers, because we know that we want the growers' thought and care and intention at the core of this work. And then lots of stuff around contracts and thinking about language and how do we make it more accessible or easier to understand what's available for entrepreneurs and different food businesses. Our third work group is our urban agriculture work group. And this work group is focused on our priority around reducing barriers to urban ag. And there's a lot of really exciting work happening here. And I think the first one to highlight is really establishing a baseline of what the process looks like to start an urban ag site in the city of Chicago. And so that takes all of the incredible resources that advocates are putting together and compiling them and understanding what is the process, and then hopefully finding the sweet spots on where we can start to make changes to make that process easier. We're also hoping to create a license for urban farming this year, which would be an incredible win. And so super excited about that work. And then also just exploring pathways to increase water access and land access. The biggest thing that I want to flag about this group and about the council as a whole is what's really beautiful is that community is and the community of growers are helping to shape this. So the idea is that the solutions we come up with are in collaboration with city departments and sister agencies and the growers at the table. And most of this work group, and you will be able to see when the slides are posted of what organizations are represented in the work group, most of this work group is growers. So wanted to flag that because I think that is an incredible space to start to think about change. And then last but not least is our BIPOC food business work group. And so this work group is focused on our priority, which is to support BIPOC entrepreneurs and food businesses with a focus on access to capital, knowing that communities have so many incredible ideas on what food businesses could look like, how they could create food sovereignty in their communities. And so the biggest barrier to access is often capital. And so how can we as a city think about that? And so the first thing is creating a Chicago Good Food Fund, which is similar to the Michigan model. But the idea is that we're offering technical assistance paired with financial investment. So that way, this private-public partnership can really foster and support businesses and make sure that they have teeth and can stay in the community. And then the other objective here is really thinking about how we can leverage our communication channels with this great network that's involved in this BIPOC food business work group to connect BIPOC food businesses to other ARPA initiatives that are happening across the city. I want to pause here for a second and have a conversation about the ARPA dollars and the exciting food equity budget that was approved that provides both seed money to start the Chicago Good Food Fund and investments for urban growers across the city. And so more to come on that soon, but flagging that we have an operating budget in a way to support some of these objectives, which is really exciting. And so before I start asking our awesome co-chairs some questions, I want to flag that this is year one of us starting to execute this food equity agenda and really activate the Food Equity Council and its work groups. But we acknowledge that there's a lot of work that needs to happen to make this a functioning and lasting system moving forward. And so some of the things that we're thinking about doing and know that will come in the future is how do we really re-institutionalize the Food Equity Council so it becomes a Chicago institution in the best way, where it is lasting and embedded in the city government. Another thing is thinking about how we deepen community engagement and continue to make sure that community voice is what's driving this work. And what can that look like, and how can we think outside of the box and support at the neighborhood level food solutions? And the last thing is really thinking about food equity data. And one, how can we track metrics over time, but also two, have those metrics be measuring what is valued to community and potentially transform some of the narrative that we sell. And so I always think about our urban growers when I think about this data, and that a lot of times we think about, pounds of fruits and vegetables grown in the year or pounds provided to community, but that doesn't tell the whole story. And so how do we start to collect data that really captures all that food is and shifts the narrative of just calories in and calories out, but really kind of connects the community back to food? And so I will stop talking there and open up some questions to our awesome co-chairs. So Erica, we just did a kind of large overview about our food system and where we're going. And I'm wondering if you can help me make some connections to this work and climate resiliency.
Yeah, I mean, I really see this work as climate resilient work and on all the levels. I mean, thinking about creating direct agency by folks at every scale of growing, because we're mindful about not saying farming because that has a USDA classification that's really specific, but growing involves all Chicagoans. So whether you're growing a house plant or you're growing in a community garden or backyard or community, a larger social impact growing space, or that you're commercially trying to grow for and by and with the community to enter into procurement and business spaces. All of those scales are relevant when you put it in the context of climate change, climate resiliency, and I think very monetizable in the context of public health and public safety. So knowing that we have young people growing up who aren't consuming and have consistent access to nutritionally dense food, culturally resonant and affirming food on a consistent basis within the built environment is super critical for everybody to understand how that has a direct relationship to how the climate is shifting, how migratory patterns, climate justice issues, why folks are moving away from lands from different geo areas because of flooding, because of weather extremes. All of those things are imperative to understand and to see how they're manifesting in Chicago. Chicago is a little microcosm, and how we're operating on this, amazing body of water that we're all stewards of, that we have a lot of resources here. And there's an opportunity to reconnect folks to the land and to have a deeper relationship with the earth through the food system. So I'm excited to answer that question. I could talk about it all day. This is a great illustration of how Urban Growers Collective and the Green Era Project, which is the city's first kind of community-based anaerobic digestion recirculating economy that's deeply rooted as a catalyst for economic development and to really exemplify best practices in environmental justice, what that looks like, and how it has an impact on a global level. Looking at micro, like our own backyard, and how that connects us to larger and larger intersectionalities when we start talking about the environment and, the atmosphere and water and patterns. We can see those, we can track those within a small garden space when we begin to look at those spaces and have agency in them. And it's a 20-year anniversary for me working on the same problem this month, kind of aligned with the founding of the Chicago Food Policy Council, then, evolved to be Action Council, Growing Power Chicago's work, and now Urban Growers Collective work as shifting from, a kind of individual kind of, these siloed organizations to being a collective approach. And that is definitely what I think all of us have been craving to do, and to be at this stage in history where we are collaborating with our city and seeing these pivots happen that really reflect how the environment should be operating. So, and how our economies should be operating, and how we can all benefit while not exploiting the environment or each other.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I think in the theme of kind of asking questions about how this work connects to other things, Juan Sebastian, I would love to ask you on connections that are happening with the Food Equity Council and other work that's happening in the city.
Yeah. Happy to talk about that too. And Ruby, thanks again for the big overview. It's even exciting just to it's a nice reminder to see the progress that we've made, I think, since, just in the last couple of years. And then kind of really building on the points that I think both you and Erica have been making about how food connects to so many things. And it's definitely been something that I have been impressed by and excited about, as I'm a little bit newer to the food space itself. But I can see these connections to so many other initiatives and to so much other work and other priorities that are coming out of the mayor's office and the city too. So I think I feel fortunate from my vantage point to be able to see some of those and try to help connect those dots as much as possible. So a couple of those that I want to call out or mention. One is around the city's and the mayor's priorities around vacant lot work or vacant lot activation, redevelopment, really repurposing for public and community benefit. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'm guessing many of you know that there are a lot of vacant lots around the city. The city of Chicago itself, we are the owner of 10,000 vacant lots. More recently, as I started working on this issue a little bit more, we staff in the mayor's office had this charge of helping just get our arms around why has the city been such a bad steward of this land, and why are there so many hurdles and barriers to community residents and groups and leaders who want to do stuff that we want them to do, right? That we know is a good use of land, like growing food, right? So there has been a lot of work coming around, or a lot of efforts around making it easier, really trying to figure out how the city can get out of our own way and navigate these various environmental or legal hurdles or barriers to make it easier for community to activate, use, buy, redevelop, vacant land that we have so much of. And of course, which is also concentrated in the majority Black neighborhoods in the South and West Side, and is also a legacy of disinvestment and structural racism too, right? So very linked to the same root causes of food insecurity. One thing that we're doing now, there's an $87 million investment that was included in the Chicago Rescue Plan towards addressing some of these vacant lot issues. One of the things that I'm excited about, this is like kind of technical, but it's actually I think a big deal, is that we are for the first time doing a historic a review of all of our environmental records on the city's city-owned lots, to be able to know just off the bat, hey, you know what? These 6,000 out of these 10,000, they seem like we feel comfortable that they're safe and that we can actually just go and sell them or lease them or activate them in some way tomorrow. In the past, we've gone through a process of every time there's an interest in one lot, we have to go down this rabbit hole of, okay, let's look at the soil, let's look at these records, let's do a phase 1, let's do a phase 2, which just the process itself has been a little clunky and murky and very expensive. Now with this investment, what we're trying to do, what we will be doing this year is doing this, inventory-wide review to know, hey, all these vacant lots we know are safe for growing food, and let's figure out a program or a pilot where we can connect our urban growers, urban agriculture efforts to some of these vacant lots. So I think there's a huge connection there, especially around the urban ag related priorities in the food equity agenda. Another one I want to call out that I also do spend a lot of my own time on as well is around our goals for, or the city's priorities around equitable development near transit, what we also call ETOD, or equitable transit oriented development, which really has a goal of, or a vision of promoting vibrant, walkable communities connected by transit, and that have diversity of housing options, that have access to both essentials like healthy food, as well as small businesses, etc. Last year, we did launch this pilot program to support some community-driven projects, development projects that fit into this vision, a number of which are also food-related. And so I think there's also a big connection between the kind of development that we're trying to encourage to happen, the kind of equitable development or community-driven development that we want to support to happen near transit, with some of these food goals, and like the desire to support greater food access and support BIPOC food businesses and entrepreneurs. A couple of the examples there, from this inaugural pilot program that we launched last year, we selected 11 projects to support, 3 of which have some connection to the food system. That includes a community-owned grocery store near the 95th Red Line station, as well as a coalition food hall in East Garfield Park. So again, I think there's a lot of connections across the various city initiatives, and it's definitely part of the work that we have to do in the mayor's office and at the city, to be connecting all these dots, because there are, of course, silos that exist everywhere. And I think that means that there's also opportunity for figuring out how to leverage these different funding programs or funding streams to benefit these goals that we're talking about here too. And I think there might even be another initiative that I had in mind, but I'm kind of forgetting. So I'll probably leave it there.
I mean, those 2 things are huge. So thank you for sharing. And I think what's exciting is thinking about the connections between all of those spaces, and that as council members, as community members, we're able to support continuing to make those connections in that space. And so I think we've talked about a lot of really exciting things, but I would love to ask Erica, who's been doing this work for so long, and Juan Sebastian, who really helped kind of bring this to the mayor's office, what does it mean for us to be here presenting on objectives for the Food Equity Council?
I mean, it's literally like a 20-year culmination of how we originally, back in 2001, the Chicago Community Trust put on a food security summit. and just sort of emergent, brought together all the kind of farmers and emergency food. And there was just a baby kind of urban ag understanding. And I actually was invited to the summit. I was doing emergency food work actually, and art psychotherapy and family resources and support. And my dad invited me to the summit. And I showed up and was like, oh yeah, this is exactly, I get it. I want to do community food center work, and open the Chicago office. Met Roger Cooley, Danny Block, and a few other folks that are kind of old timers, and a bunch of other folks. And kind of at the Food Policy Council began to develop. We brought in Mark Winnie, who was kind of the godfather of food policy councils out of Hartford, and he shared sort of the pros and cons of having a food council in city government versus outside. And we realized in Chicago that it really needed to be a hybridized kind of convening. But that was 20 years ago. And so slowly but surely, there's just lots of kind of foundational organizations that are still involved in the food sector who were part of this sort of evolution around what does food policy look like in Chicago? How does it intersect with government? How does it support community efforts? What are the resources that can come to bear to really create agency, especially for people of color who are, we have historic redlining. This is kind of the birthplace of a lot of funky stuff, can also be the birthplace of some amazing things. And because our city really does reflect the world, to be able to do this kind of food policy work in an intersectional way at this time is so important. And to see it evolve, to see the Food Policy Council go from being Chicago area to Chicago, to having action in its title, and to sort of culminate to actually have a food equity council rooted in the mayor's office as a permanent fixture that is very much reflective of all the sectors of food, to be able to have accountability, transparency, and consistency, especially in times of emergency, which we were not prepared for the pandemic. So to be able to have this space where everybody can convene and begin looking at mutual aid efforts, which were amazing. Look at worker-owned co-ops to really shore up and accelerate agency at the community level around food, something people love some Chicago food. We got good food here. And to be able to bring, to be recognized for that, and recognized for, the beautiful cultures and the ways that we celebrate, and can remain in our communities. Food can do that, to be able to have access to land, and to be able to not have that be a sort of, food growing efforts and kind of community block by block kind of beauty and activity, not being sort of a transient thing, but something that's important to reflect our cultures, and to really, it's good economic development policy and good planning policy. And I think there's an appetite and understanding across sectors at this point that wasn't there 20 years ago. And as a grower, as somebody who's got calluses and often dirt under my fingernails, being out and really understanding some of the dynamics of how hard it is to kind of navigate through things that should be really easy. It's really satisfying to be at this point, to see all of it coming together, and it to be institutionalized, or as we put in quotes, re-institutionalized, because we want to reframe what institutional collective power looks like in Chicago.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. And I think for the sake of time, I want to ask Juan Sebastian one last question. And I think we have such a bold list of 2022 objectives. What is most exciting, or what do you feel like is the most important thing for us to accomplish?
Yeah, I think it can be hard to choose, because even thinking about all the objectives that you went over earlier, so much of it is exciting. I think for me, from like a structural or a systems change perspective, and even maybe building on, Erica just mentioned collective power too. What I'm excited about, well, I have been very excited and grateful for the leadership of community groups and leaders like Erica, all the members that were part of the inaugural group and that are now part of the Equity Council. I'm a firm believer that, to solve these complex problems, we need to be working like hand in hand, government, community, civic groups, nonprofit, et cetera. I'm looking forward and excited for the council itself to just continue building that muscle of working together. Ruby, obviously, like having you join in your role has also been immensely critical and so beneficial. And so I think what I'm really excited about, or what I think is like really going to be important this year, is just to like continue building this muscle of working collectively, collaboratively, rebuilding trust or building trust where none has existed before, and just working towards that long-term vision that we have. Making sure that we're all rowing in the same direction and that we're doing it with community at the center, centering our values of equity and justice. So I think my mind really right now is gravitating a lot towards this like process and collaboration pieces of this, which I think are what is going to be most, that is what will lead to the longest lasting change itself. So aside from all the like very, very important, needed and cool specific things we want to do around urban ag pilots or licenses or communications around federal nutrition programs, et cetera, I think it's really also about the collective muscle and power that we can build as a group.
Awesome. Let's open it up to questions. Sorry, we're chatty Cathys. We intended to have more time. So Sarah, thank you for this question. Tulsa is also building a more equitable food system. Our Urban Ag Coalition is majority owning class white growers who dominate all the funding with almost zero BIPOC. Have y'all experienced this as well? How do you navigate this? I'm going to kick this to our expert grower on the panel. No pressure, right? But I think this is a challenging question.
I think of Tulsa, Black Wall Street. That's some.
It's a triggering question. Not gonna.
It is a very triggering question. I think that that terrain has shifted a great deal in Chicago. I know that when I first started, it was very difficult to just get understanding, which is why we really we pivoted into public land. So working with the Park District and the Commons, knowing that it was just too mystifying to understand how to even purchase lots. It wasn't even, I just would hear theoretics, but not really any pathway. And it was just very difficult to kind of feel the urgency of wanting to begin growing and showing what was possible in a scale that wasn't just sort of frosting or kind of eye candy around what food sovereignty could look like, but really showing that we can grow a lot of food and it has an economic and health impact if folks are able to do this throughout the city, and how important it is for healing, for, therapy, just to be able to go out and pull weeds and grow food. Like, we knew that this was something that was more than just sort of a, show me how this is an impact. How is this how is this more important than putting in a 3-flat, throwing it up and it being flipped and displacing community? That you can do development in ways that is equitable. So I think that has shifted, but this is why the council exists. That's why it's not just food policy, but food equity, because the equity piece in this around who has power, who has access to resources, and then who has the power levers. Because even if you have resources, it can just be just as difficult to move through when you're coming at it from a Black, Indigenous, people of color perspective, or low income, or marginalized in any kind of way, or not part of the power structure. That's just the case anywhere. And in Chicago, it's complex because it's ward by ward too. So I think that being able to dismantle some of those pieces so that there is clarity around not only who can access those levers, but also that it's something that is centered around the communities that are most disenfranchised and have had the least amount of development from and for the community that's most impacted by all these health and crime statistics. So I think that That's a complicated, awesome question that I could write a book about. But yeah, I think we're lucky in Chicago because we've really grown a thriving Black, Latinx, Indigenous, people of color community of growers who are, dare I say it, badasses. I'll say it. I mean, really, like on all levels, and it's exciting to see the approach is not just being uniform. Like this is how you do it. If you have to grow like this, there's so many different approaches, and they're all important, and they can all be supported. And just seeing folks kind of squat up, form circles, that are intersectional. I put a little flavor on there, but really like complement each other. That's kind of new because we're able to have more. There is more bandwidth, and there's so many people who, as all of these systems begin to accelerate, are going to activate and want to get involved. And that's exciting. We're herbs in order. Our city's motto is "City in a Garden." To not embrace that and utilize it as a powerful tool for economic and climate resilient change is a missed opportunity. So, and we have not forgotten Tulsa.
Thank you, Erica. Javier, I can answer your question about when we anticipating launching the Chicago Good Food Fund and if we have a website. So we do have a microsite on the City of Chicago's website where you can see our food equity agenda and some guidance on opening food pantries. In terms of the Chicago Good Food Fund, it's the goal that January 2023 we'll be able to give out the first dollars of what that looks like. I do want to flag that I didn't kind of cover a lot of things about the Good Food Fund, but want to point out a few things. The ultimate goal is to connect other existing funds in the city of Chicago or create a lane that does not already exist to make sure that we're filling that void. So I wanted to just flag those two things. And whenever I say this, I always like to acknowledge that the Food Equity Council's goal is to not create a new table, but connect other tables and not take away from the work that's already happening. So I just wanted to take this moment to flag that as we talk about the Good Food Fund, but all of this other work, that these objectives are uplifting the work that's happening in the community and not trying to take away from that work. So that's, I guess, a Ruby tangent of sorts. I don't know if we have time for one more question. And so Kamala, I can answer this or read it. And see if I can answer it. I have students concerned about any developments leading to gentrification. This looks promising, could create a very cool food community. What measures could be taken to stall that, as there are already land grabs happening now?
I could try to reply.
Yeah, I'm like,
quickly.
That's a perfect Juan Sebastian question.
Yeah, and like one of the ways that we're thinking a lot about about anti-displacement strategies too is around community ownership, which I know has been a topic that at least some folks in the community in the Food Equity Council have been a part of too. But I would just, with not having a lot of time, I would just point to some of those models of land trust, community land trust, or other mechanisms that can support getting actual land into the hands of community residents and members as a key part of how to prevent that kind of gentrification that can come from development. I think in the city of Chicago, we again have a big opportunity with our vacant land inventory as a starting point too, which is a little bit of how I would love to see our work grow at the city.
Right, and echoing off Juan Sebastian before we sign off, he alluded to the vacant lot pilot that we're exploring in the Urban Ag Workgroup. But I think when I want to plus one to that is community is helping to shape that. And we hope to, and I shout out to one of our colleagues in the city who uses this term, but place keep instead of place make, where we keep these places as community places. And so thinking about how we bring that framework to the work that we do. So I think that's it. We appreciate you guys taking, oh, yes, Erica.
I also just want to do a shout out for a session this afternoon from 2 to 3 around the Community Food Navigator, which is going to be super helpful in connecting eaters and growers and beginning to really form just inform agency and connectivity between growers. We're really excited about the process. It's been a long process of developing this project, and members of the Food Equity Council and committees and just the broader community have been heavily engaged, and we're really excited to share that. So check it out, 2 to 3, or whatever, 2 to 4. I think there's a link going into the chat. Because I don't do that part, but we're excited about that as well. So just want to share that.